Hello, my name is Lisa Fimiani, and I'm going to share family stories of service and valor. I never knew my grandfather. He died before I was born. However, the stories my mother and grandmother used to tell my brothers and I made me wish I had known him. This is a certificate of identity during World War I for my grandfather, Michael R. DeVita, who was in the medical unit. As my cousin Rick remembered, imagine the life of a newly matriculated surgeon during the start of the First World War, whose experience probably consisted largely of appendectomies and gallbladder surgeries, who then finds himself dealing with traumatic injuries caused by machine guns, mortars, 75 to 105 millimeter artillery shells, as well as injuries caused by poison gas which turned out to affect him when he treated those patients who were gassed. Fast forward 25 years later, and imagine his thoughts watching his own boys set off naively into the meat grinder of humanity known as war, knowing all too well the consequences on the human body. And tragically, he would lose one son in World War II, and the other would be severely injured. Those heavy burdens of the heart probably contributed to his early death at 53. These images are of grandfather in happier moments during World War I, and he always told my grandmother he would take her back someday. He never got the chance. Here's my grandmother and my grandfather back in 1918 and about 28 years later. I also never knew my Uncle Jim, since he too died before I was born. Again, the stories my mother and grandmother shared with my brothers and me made me sad. He never lived to have 3 sets of twins, as he once expressed to my mother, living on a farm happily ever after. His life was cut short at 20. And to this day, we don't know if the plane he was flying crashed due to pilot error, mechanical failure, or sabotage. Uncle Jim enlisted on December 31st, 1941, 23 days after Pearl Harbor. He was described by his commanding officers as a born flyer. He loved to fly. He seemed to pick up the skills easily. However, as my cousin Rick shared with me back in the beginning of the war, the military was trying to turn out pilots as fast as they could. Early in the war, the Air Force was pushing 18 to 20-year-old boys to become pilots as quickly as possible. On the day he died, he was told to practice a maneuver that many experienced pilots wouldn't even try. And the plane manufacturer says it shouldn't even have been done. Recovery from a spin. He was told to do this maneuver with a ridiculously low number of hours flying, something like 20 hours. Most pilots today are lucky to fly solo at 20 hours, much less practice an advanced maneuver that plane makers say not to do. But Uncle Jim did it, and his plane crashed. Very soon after the crash, the FBI was called in to investigate another flyer in his unit, also from Buffalo, who apparently disliked Uncle Jim. There was concern that he may have actually sabotaged Uncle Jim's plane. And to this day, we don't know the truth since the FBI could not gather sufficient evidence. Coincidentally, this pilot was dishonorably discharged from the Army Air Force shortly after. This actually has haunted our family ever since. These are some of the newspaper clippings of the death of my Uncle Jim on July 6th, 1942. And then my grandfather on July 8th, 1946. My Uncle Mike, and this was told to me by my cousin Rick, was enlisted on August 4th, 1943. His division landed on Omaha Beach 5 days after D-Day on June 11th, 1944. And his job description in the Army was that of first scout, which means he was essentially the tip of the spear in the Army's drive into the hedgerow country of Normandy. It also meant his life expectancy was one of the lowest in the Army in the summer of 1944. Uncle Mike never spoke about the war when we were all young. However, one story he did tell when he was landing in a foxhole with a buddy, when suddenly the buddy pitched forward. And as Uncle Mike told it, he looked frantically for a wound that he might treat, but found nothing. Then he ripped open the soldier's shirt and found that a bullet had hit him in the base of the neck below the collar, probably killing him instantly. Another story was that he had come upon an American Sherman tank that was hit and on fire. As only a teenager might do, he clambered up on the tank and pulled out the tank commander. And as it turned out, the man he rescued also happened to be the tank company commander. He said members of that tank company showered him with booze and smokes. As he told the story, because of the burns on his face that he received from sticking his head into the hatch with flames shooting out of it, he was never able to shave again with anything except Noxzema shaving cream. My cousin Rick fondly remembers that smell in the bathroom for years. When Uncle Mike was injured, Cousin Rick shared that the doctors who were treating him were on the cutting edge of the new field of plastic surgery, pioneering techniques on him and many of the World War II veterans. As a young girl, I marveled at my Uncle Mike's arms. He had circular scars on his forearms, and it was how he carried himself that made me think he was really cool. Those scars were caused by skin grafts that grew when the doctors surgically attached his arms, which had huge gaping wounds, to his abdomen. The skin from his abdomen kind of grew into the holes in his arms. Then after a period of time, the doctor separated his arms from his abdomen, with the holes filled in with the skin from his abdomen. As Cousin Rick humorously said, he was the first in our family to get a tummy tuck. All kidding aside, Uncle Mike endured 30 surgeries, and some were performed without anesthesia or painkillers so that he could tell the doctors whether he felt the nerves being reconnected in his arms as they were working with their instruments. I can't even imagine what he went through. Sadly, Uncle Mike passed away at the age of 63 on November 22nd, 1986. I'm showing you some images from the war, a note that my Uncle Mike dictated, a cheery little note to his parents, written by a nurse, and then the note from the Army saying that he was coming home for more treatment. My Uncle Mike was told that he would never be able to drive a car or operate tools or machinery, and his dream of becoming a doctor, like his father, my grandfather, was not going to be possible. Nevertheless, he did drive cars, he operated tools, and he was able to function beyond the doctor's expectations. This photo was taken at his wedding to my Aunt Glo. Notice his hands. They are in a fixed position. It's a condition due to the multiple surgeries, but he made them work. And I never, as a child, thought of him as disabled. This was my father. My brother Jim recalled my father's service record in Buffalo, New York. Native to Buffalo, New York, Robert J Fimiani was attending Notre Dame at the start of World War II. After a submarine recruiting officer told tales of excitement of submarine warfare, he signed up. ROTC was not what it was cracked up to be, as insane curfew rules left the recruits studying impossible difficult curriculum like physics and calculus, using slide rules no less, huddled in freezing cold, unlit bathrooms at night, using flashlights to get in the required study time to pass exams, all under the risk of severe punishment if caught. After submarine school at New London, Connecticut, training in antiquated O-boats, Lieutenant Robert Femiani earned his gold dolphins, only to find that the only gold dolphins available at the time were very expensive. Real gold ones. So what could he do? He purchased them, a cherished possession to this day for our family. He was assigned to one of the most hallowed and hard-hitting boats in the history of all submarine warfare, the USS Silversides. And after Commanders Burlingham and Coy, he served under their third and final commander, Captain Nichols, in 1945. By the time the young officer's submarine arrived in the Pacific Theater, the pickings were very slim. Rescuing downed pilots, no small effort, was the main task at the time, and his sub was involved in many a rescue that returned costly trained pilots to their duty and eventually to their families. Of the 504 rescues of downed pilots accomplished by 86 different submarines, the Silversides had plucked 2 of the lucky pilots from the sea and sank a medium-sized freighter. The activity of saving pilots was known as the silent service because they could not boast about it, had to keep their location secret, or they too could become targets of the enemy. As a reserve officer on the USS Diodine during the Korean War, Lieutenant Femiani was promoted to second in command, the executive officer, conducting training missions between San Francisco and San Diego. He retired from the Navy Reserve in November of 1983. 3 years later, at the age of 63, he passed away within a day of my Uncle Mike. My brother Jim shared the photograph my mom took when my dad's sub was leaving on patrol in the 1950s, south of La Jolla. Fast forward some 30-odd years later, and she took my brother to the same spot where it was taken, in the Veterans Cemetery overlooking the sea in San Diego. Thus are the memories as shared with me by my brother Jim and my cousin Rick of 4 family heroes from the First and Second World Wars. Young men who served their country and paid the price, either in their lives or the quality of their lives. God rest their souls.